So our final panelist today is Professor Liaquat Takimi, the Sarja Chair in Global Islam at McMaster University in Canada. A prolific writer and speaker, he has authored more than 130 scholarly works, which have been published in various journals, books, and encyclopedia. He has written on a wide range of topics such as Reformation in Islam, the role of custom in shaping Islamic law, Islam in the Western diaspora, Islamic fundamentalism, Islamic mystical tradition, Islamophobia, and the treatment of women in Islamic law, and many other topics. Professor Takim has also spoken at more than 110 academic, national, and international conferences. So we're very honored to have him join our small conference here today. He has published over 3 books and is now working on his 4th on Ijtihad and Reformation in Islam. And Professor Takim has taught at several universities and is actively engaged in dialogue with different faith communities. So welcome today, Professor Takimi, and over to you.
Well, thank you, and it's a great honor and a pleasure to be here in front of you. How many minutes do I have? I think just want to be sure I keep it.
You should have 10 minutes. Yeah, let's 10 minutes per presentation, and then that'll allow us a little bit of time for questions at the end.
Okay, so I'll just kind of condense my talk. Basically, I want to talk about the Quranic notion of peace and coexistence and contrast this with the juridical notion, because my contention is that what Muslim scholars pronounce in terms of peace and coexistence is quite different from what the Quranic notion of peaceful coexistence is. Islam emerged in a pluralistic milieu whereby Muslims had to engage with others. In fact, the Qur'an pronounces the concept of fitra, or an innate disposition, which is a kind of an ethical language that all human beings can understand and relate to. The Qur'an even says that all human beings have been created from one essence in chapter 4, verse 1, and that there is an objective and universal binding standard that is accessible to all human beings, regardless of their religious or ethnic affiliation. Diversity, human diversity, is seen as a basis for peaceful coexistence, and that in the Quranic understanding, the guidance comes from God, and He alone has the right to decide the spiritual destiny of human beings. As we are aware, the Quran very clearly pronounces there is no compulsion in religion, and that human beings must unite under one God and strive towards virtuous deeds. The most noble in the eyes of God is the most pious one. Interestingly, the Quran itself does not restrict salvation to a particular group of people. It says this quite clearly in at least 2 positions, chapter 2, verse 62, chapter 5, verse 69. When the Quran does talk about war, it uses the term harb rather than jihad. Jihad is used in a very generic way, as we know, meaning to strive and to exert yourself in the path of God. The Quran only allows fighting when there is a breakdown or a threat to the public order. Therefore, it states very clearly, fight those who fight you, but do not transgress. The permission to fight was a response to the threat posed by the Meccan tribes. The permission to fight was not against those who refused to accept Islam. So the idea of fighting was against those who threatened the Muslims, not against those who refused to accept God. The Quran even goes further and lays down the rules of engagement. And the Prophet Muhammad himself is asked and told that if they offer you peace, then you must accept peace. Jihad was only allowed to eradicate oppression, not to sanction invasion. Therefore, the Quran says, if they stop fighting you, you must also desist. And furthermore, in chapter verse 60, verse 8 and 9, the Quran states, God does not forbid you to interact with and connect with those who do not fight you. However, this is quite different from what the classical jurists living in the 8th and 9th centuries pronounced regarding jihad. These jurists divided the world into 2 abodes which do not even exist in the Quran, Darul Harb and Darul Amana, or Darul Kufr and Darul Islam. That is the abode of Islam and the abode of warfare. These abodes do not exist in the Quran. For the scholars, not for the Quran, it's important to stress, for the scholars, peace was only possible when all human beings lived under Darul Islam. Jurists were able to legitimize through this conceptualization the expansion of the Muslim empire. This concept of jihad by the jurists reflected the historical realities and the political necessities of the Muslim world. The jurists deduced laws based on the principle of maslahah, that is the principle of the welfare of the community, and also they pronounced the idea of siyar, meaning international laws. International law, the focus here was more on the conduct rather than the legality of warfare. They almost took it for granted that Muslims had the right to engage in warfare when others do not accept the Muslim ascendancy or Muslim rule. The purpose of jihad for the jurists was peace through subjugation. If peaceful preaching is allowed, then there will be no grounds for warfare. However, war was to be conducted after all attempts at peace have been exhausted. I do not have the time to go into great details, but Muslims were required to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. Also, there was proportionality important in warfare. The jurists themselves disagreed as to whether a person can engage in jihad on account of disbelief. Many scholars said jihad was only allowed if there was a threat to the Islamic order. However, other jurists said that people of the book were to be offered the choice between the acceptance of Islam or subjugation and living under Islamic law, provided they paid the jizya. However, what about those who are not people of the book? Here we find that many jurists, including the Shafi'is, say that they were given the opportunity to submit to Islam, and if non-Muslims, primarily the kuffar or polytheists, refuse to accept Islam, then they should be fought against, even though the Quran says very clearly there is no compulsion in religion. Unless the Islamic State was attacked, only the Caliph could declare jihad. Other jurists went even further and said that the Caliph must declare jihad at least once a year after a process, a proper juridical process. The problem is, of course, in today's world, there is no clergyhood in Islam. We find that many people in different walks of life somehow become self-proclaimed sheikhs and declare jihad. And even though initially the jihad was only in the hands of the select few, including the Caliph, now because of the lack of the caliphate and the lack of clergyhood, we find people like bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri and others declare jihad. Let us be clear, people like bin Laden are not religious authorities, nor do they have the authority to declare war. When we look at the Quran very clearly, we'll see that war was only under certain circumstances, primarily defensive. Those who advocated, the jurists, the classical jurists, who advocated warfare, claimed that 124 tolerant verses in the Quran were abrogated by a few war verses in the Quran. The jurists even went further and declared a third sphere. Again, this was not in the Quran, but based on the realities of the time, they declared a third sphere, which was Darul Sulh. In other words, the abode of truce, whereby peace was based on treaties, not on proper recognition of the other and the dignity of others. Peace was also based on alliances and cooperation. The Imam could contract peace if it was in the interest, only if it was in the interest of the Muslim community. Muslims could also offer amana, that is peace or safe passage, to non-Muslims for up to 1 year only. Aman, the concept of Aman or Darul Aman, temporarily suspended, but did not eliminate hostilities. In reality, though, we found that in different parts of the world, Muslims have lived peacefully with non-Muslims, especially Spain, where Muslims not only accepted, but also embraced and tolerated Jews and Christians. In fact, as we know historically, Jews have always been treated much better by Muslims than by Christians in Europe. In short, and to sum up, even though the Quran posited a notion of peaceful coexistence, jurists invented and created certain ways of not only forcing Islam on others, but also subjugating and demonizing the others. Qur'an, for example, did not impose any limitations on the demeanor with dhimmis. Yet, the classical jurists state that non-Muslims cannot have the same rights and the same obligations and liberties as Muslims do. Qur'an, for example, allowed the evidence of non-Muslims when no Muslim was available to witness the will of a Muslim who died on a journey. Abu Hanifa, however, rejected the evidence of non-Muslims in this case, and Abu Yusuf declared the Quranic passage to have been abrogated by another verse. Discriminatory measures were enforced on non-Muslims. Prohibition of building new churches or repairing old ones were enacted. Priests, according to some scholars, had to be forcibly circumcised simply because they persisted in following the example of Jesus, who was in fact circumcised. A Jew or a Christian would not dress like an important person, and a Jew can wash a Muslim toilet, but not the other way around. And distinctive clothing, etc., they had to be worn by Jews and Christians, special emblems to show their inferior status. In short, then, in many ways, I see a complete disjuncture between what Islam stated, between what the Quran stated regarding the other, and what later jurists clearly demarcated of how the others were to be treated. Thank you very much.